Good morning, Rainier View. My name is Jeff. I'm part of the teaching team here, and we're continuing in our series Beyond Bored and Confused. And today we're looking at some of the wisdom that the Bible has for any of our lives. Now, before we go any further, I want to ask the question, why do men tend to die earlier than women? Is there some sort of genetic thing going on? Is there some sort of specific environmental factors? No, the reality is that men just tend to be dumber around certain activities than women are. For example, see some of these geniuses, okay? It's as if they got together and said, hey, the first thing that we can do when we invented ladders or electricity is let's see what the dumbest thing is that we can do with these things. What's the most dangerous way we can interact with these elements? I don't know what it is, but it just seems like guys can be a little bit dumber around this stuff than the ladies. Now, the good news is that any and all of us have access to wisdom that not only can keep us away from some of these obvious fails, the things that we know we shouldn't be doing, but there's actually a source of wisdom from the Bible that can help us live life well. And so we're going to be exploring in our series here, Beyond Bored and Confused, we're looking at what is called the wisdom literature of the Bible, okay? Because we all need more wisdom. We all need more skill in how to live life well. Now, the wisdom literature in the Bible can take various forms. For example, there's this book called Ecclesiastes, which is kind of a cross between a TED Talk and a 90s alt-rock song. Okay, it's just kind of, that's his vibe, that's his thing. But today we're going to be looking at the largest collection of wisdom literature, which is contained in a book called the Book of Proverbs. And so the Book of Proverbs give us more of these kind of tweetable quotes of just general wisdom for how to live life well. And so that's what we're going to be looking at, the Book of Proverbs. And many of them were written by King Solomon writing to his sons. And so we felt it's kind of appropriate on Father's Day weekend to be talking about this because dads always be lecturing, right? And so we're going to look at some of this wisdom that he wanted to pass along because Solomon was known as one of the wisest men who ever lived. That when God said, I will give you whatever you ask for, he didn't ask for riches, he didn't ask for fame, he asked for more wisdom. And so we want to take a look at that wisdom today. Now, there are other proverbs contributed by some other individuals, and somebody came along and organized and collected these mostly sayings. But what they all have in common is that they're general principles for life. They're not absolute promises. And so what the Proverbs do is they intermingle, they marry these two things of these general principles for a life well lived with the reality of God's presence in our lives, and they seamlessly interconnect these two things. And so we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do a top 10 list. We're going to count down from 10 to 1, and we're going to look at 10 pieces of uncommon common sense from the Proverbs. And so I promise to try and avoid too many dad jokes, but there's got to be at least one or two that will happen here. So let's just jump right in. Number 10, the first piece of uncommon common sense that we see from the Proverbs is this. Recognizing God is present in your life is the first step to living wisely. Recognizing that God is present in your life is the first step to living wisely. What do the Proverbs say? They say, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now, foolishness is not about, in the Proverbs, intellectual capacity. Foolishness refers to moral deficiency in the Proverbs, meaning throughout history, some of the most intelligent people who've ever lived have also been some of the most morally bankrupt individuals that have ever lived. And so this is why this is the starting point, and this is why Solomon opens up Proverbs with this focus. And so let me give you a modern example that will help point to the reality of this wisdom contained in Proverbs. So anyone who is familiar with AA knows the first couple of steps, that you must admit that on your own you are powerless over alcohol, and this is true of any addiction, and that secondly, you need to recognize a higher power in your life if you are going to achieve and maintain sobriety. And you may or may not know that AA developed their principles out of God's Word, out of the Bible, out of these truths from the Bible, and they took these principles and put them into a cohesive system. Now, about like one day before the pandemic started, this study put out by Stanford University probably got lost a little bit to the pages of the internet, but they put out a study in March 2020 that pointed to the reality that AA helps more people achieve sobriety than even therapy does. They did a study, they looked at the factors which is most effective, and that this is what they concluded. Now, that is not to say that therapy is bad. You should use any tool that helps you live out these uncommon common sense principles. But the problem is if you think all you need is yourself, or all you need is one individual to help you figure out how to live life well, you're going to fall short of being able to live what the Proverbs call living wisely, living life with skill, the way God wants you to. You need community in your life that acknowledges God as both real and present and necessary. That Stanford study proves that we need that kind of community if we're going to experience life change. And anything that dismisses this truth really is just another child that's birthed out of our hyper-individualistic culture, that all I need is myself. All I need to do is look within. And the wisdom from Proverbs and even this study confirm what's known over and over again throughout the course of history, that we need something beyond ourselves and bigger than ourselves. And so, again, that's why we at Rainier View put out this quarterly groups guide. We know you need community. And so once a quarter at Rainier View, you can find a place to begin experiencing and building community in your life to live wisely, which leads to the next piece of uncommon common sense that I want to talk about from Proverbs. Number 9, you can be right and get it all wrong. You can be right and get it all wrong. Stop elbowing your spouse right now, okay? What do the Proverbs say? The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. See, we want to believe that we're so smart, we're so self-sufficient, we have all the answers on our own. But that's just a lack of uncommon common sense that we see in the Proverbs. Because it's not that we are insufficient to have the knowledge that we need. It's that we don't have the right perspectives on our own lives. We have blind spots that on our own we just can't see in the way we think, in the way we interact, in the way we talk to others, in the decision-making we need. And so we need the presence of others. Now, all of us do, but especially if you're a young person here, you need to look at the community that you're keeping, those closest relationships and the people that you hang out with. Are they giving you, are they providing you with wisdom? Again, in particular, those of you here who are joining us at Rainier View who are a young adult or a teenager, man, think about the community that you have around you. Are your friends leading you to a life that is has an increasing sense of joy, of peace, of kindness, of goodness? And we need that community that includes that element of God being present and real and understanding who He is and what it looks like. And we need those people who are leading us to exhibit those types of qualities. And so, but no matter what age, we all need that community. And so this reminds us of number 8 on the uncommon common sense list for today, that your closest friendships will determine the trajectory of your choices. Your closest friendships will determine the trajectory of your choices. And Proverbs gives us two extremes to avoid when it comes to our friendships and relationships. Because we can either surround ourselves with people that aren't really true friends, aren't really helping us live wisely, or we can really cut ourselves off from any relationship that allows somebody to get close enough to speak into our lives. What does Proverbs say? An unfriendly person pursues selfish ends, and against all sound judgment starts quarrels. On the other extreme, a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. So we see that one extreme of just living so much against anybody else being able to be close to us that we end up isolated and alone. But the flip side of that is seeming like we have a level of popularity, seeming like we have lots of relationships, but ultimately we really are alone. We don't have anybody who really knows us and knows what's going on in our lives. But if you do have that friend that's close enough to you to know what's really going on internally for you, that's there for you in the ups and downs and the thick and thin, it can show up and can point out when you're off track, man, invest in those relationships. Make the inconvenient time to build into and foster and maintain those kind of friendships. Do you have somebody who's close enough to see when you're drifting off course and you need that corrective shout out to get back on track? And so you might be saying, that sounds great. I don't have those relationships in my life right now. Where should I start when it comes to building those kind of friendships? Number 7 on the list of uncommon common sense today from Proverbs is to be generous first. Be generous first. Be the one to extend an invitation first. Be the one to share the encouraging word or thought first. Be the one to go first in starting a new friendship. Be the one to go first in fulfilling a need. Don't wait till somebody asks for help. Show up and be the help. Be generous first. Okay? Proverbs says this, the generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. Now, yes, this has a slant towards financial generosity, but we can be generous in so many different ways with our time, in the places that we occupy and show up in the resources we have, in the words that we speak. We can refresh others through our generosity. Let me share just a brief example of how this has happened recently for me in my life. So our community group here at Rainier View, like all of our community groups, we encourage you to engage in certain rhythms, certain spiritual disciplines together as a group each quarter. Pick 1 or 2 and pick one of the weeks or a couple of the weeks in your quarter to engage with these. And so this spring, we were looking for a way to engage as a group in serving. Now, it's tough to serve together. We all have kids at all various ages, and so it can be difficult to land on and find something that we can all serve on together. But one person in our group learned from a local school counselor of a need of about 50 students at their middle school who are experiencing some level of transitional housing need, meaning they might not be homeless in the sense of on the streets, but they don't have a home of their own. They're sleeping on a friend's couch somewhere. They're on a trailer on somebody's property. Even some of them are living out of vehicles. Okay? And so the school counselor said, what would be helpful is if we were able to get these students toiletries for the summer before they head out and away, from school for a few months. And if we could send them with toiletries, that would be great. So our group said, okay, all right, we can be a little bit extra generous. All of us go out and get something. Some of us, went out and got body washes, some got shampoo and conditioner, some got feminine hygiene products, some got hair ties. And so we all brought this stuff, all these different elements, and we built these backpacks, these 50 backpacks. And then we had somebody drop them off to the school counselor. Why? We wanted to be generous. We wanted to go first. We wanted to meet a physical need. But that's not the only way to be generous. At this same school, I had been in some faith leaders meetings locally, and so this school counselor showed up not once, but twice, appealing to us, hey, I would love to have anyone who is willing to come and serve as a watchdog. Watchdogs is a national parenting program to get dads, men in schools to just be a positive presence around students. And so after hearing this not once but twice, I said, okay, I can give a couple lunchtimes a month. And so I just started showing up, smiling, asking middle schoolers how they're doing, and just being a presence on a campus. Why? I chose to be generous and go first. And it has been the best decision that I've made all year long. Now, I don't share that to say, how awesome I am. Look at me, how great, or how great is my group, okay? I share that as a concrete example of what it looks like to be generous, what it looks like to go first, to not wait. That is the way of living wisely. And so what are the resources? What are the spaces and places that you can show up in and be generous? A great place to begin if you don't know where, start with your words, right? Everybody needs more encouragement. It doesn't cost you a thing. It's one of the easiest, quickest things for us to share, and yet for some reason it is so difficult to do because it requires a little bit of retraining for many of us because as human beings, with our words, we actually love to criticize and talk trash, right? It's just part of our human nature. And so that leads us to number 6 on the uncommon common sense out of Proverbs that we're looking at today, that speaking without thought and speaking all your thoughts only leads to pain. Speaking without thought and speaking all your thoughts only leads to pain. There are so many Proverbs that have something to say about this. Let me just share a few. It is foolish to belittle one's neighbor. A sensible person keeps quiet. A gossip goes around telling secrets, but those who are trustworthy can keep a confidence. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even tempered. A gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. I think when it comes to our speech, that's enough said. I think the best way to be reminded to be intentional with our words is actually number 5 on my list of uncommon common sense from Proverbs, that we all need a Yoda and we need to be a Yoda, because this is the way of uncommon common sense. Okay, you knew a dad joke was coming. You knew a bad dad joke was coming, okay? But what does Proverbs have to say about this? Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I too was a son to my father, still tender, cherished by my mother. Then he taught me, and he said to me, take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commands, and you will live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or turn away from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it costs you all you have, get understanding. This is maybe the most dad thing ever, a dad passing down knowledge to his son, right? It's so, just poignant and stereotypical all at once. Now, you may not have had this experience with your biological father, but the reality is, God, if we're willing to have the eyes to see it, brings people into our lives who can impart this kind of wisdom to us. Okay, and you have been created by God to reach a point of maturity in your life where you can pass along and give wisdom to somebody else. This is the expected behavior for people of faith. This is just expected of us. We see this dynamic play out in the New Testament where Paul, the Apostle Paul, who went around and began starting churches all over the ancient world in the first century, he had a young leader that he was mentoring. He was being like a Yoda to Timothy. And Timothy, in turn, went and helped establish a church of his own and was a leader there and was able to pass along what he had learned from Paul and pass that along to other people. Okay? And so if you don't have somebody who's speaking into your life and you're not speaking into somebody else's life, you're missing out on this piece of uncommon common sense that helps us live life well, because it reminds us, when we have these two factors in play, that life isn't about us. It's not just about us. Which leads to point number 4 on our list of uncommon common sense for today, that you need to know what's driving you and where that's leading you. You need to know what's driving you and where that's leading you. The Proverbs say this: my son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and health to one's whole body. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Keep your mouth free of perversity. Keep corrupt talk far from your lips. Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet and be steadfast in all your ways. Do not turn to the right or to the left to keep your foot from evil. And so there's 2 super important things from this chunk out of Proverbs. The first is this: is that you and I need to learn to guard our hearts. We need to learn to guard our hearts. The internal stuff of that is going on for us. This is really what the Proverbs mean when it comes to heart. It's your motives, it's your internal processing, your internal thoughts, the things within. That's your heart. And why it's so important to guard our hearts is because that will determine the direction of our lives. And so if we understand what's going on in our hearts and those emotions and those motivations and those thoughts, when we understand them correctly, then and only then can we learn to have clear focus, that we can have our eyes straight ahead, fixed straight ahead. We can have a clear focus on knowing where we're going if we know what's going on in our hearts. We can learn to not get distracted by the things that detract us from loving God or loving our neighbor as ourself. Okay? And so when we love ourselves, when we care for ourselves the way that God wants us to, we learn, we discover that we do that, not to bless our own lives, to make our lives awesome for us, but we're able to bless others better when we do that. And that starts with guarding our heart so that we can fix our eyes in a clear direction on where God wants us to go. And if you're able to do that, to guard your heart, to fix your focus on a spot where God is leading you, okay, then you're going to be able to do uncommon common sense number 3 from Proverbs that we're talking about today, which is to learn from your mistakes. Learn from your mistakes. Proverbs says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. Now, I have a bit of a hot take on why people continue to make the same mistakes, right? Are you ever confused why that one person just keeps, right, they keep getting in romantic relationships with a terrible match, and it just makes a mess of their life, and you're like, that person is too smart. Why do they keep doing this? Or you see somebody who, again, they're completely intelligent enough, but they keep making the same mistakes, maybe financially, or maybe in the workplace, or in their friendships. And what's going on here, right? And so what I think is going on is that there are too many people who are trying to pursue perfection over progress, okay? There's too many of you who are trying to pursue perfection over progress. Because here's the problem. No one is perfect. Some of you don't want to believe it. Let me say it slowly so you can catch it. No one is perfect, okay? But so many of us labor under the pressure to achieve some sort of version of the perfect life, to have the perfect marriage or the perfect living room decoration scheme or the perfect job or to be in perfect health, and on it goes. And when it comes to this, social media is not your friend because you're just seeing the highlight reel, sometimes a doctored highlight reel, of everybody's high points of their life. You're only seeing the perfect spikes in an otherwise normal, boring, or difficult life of others. Now, again, it's totally fine to celebrate the high points of other people's lives, but we need to pay attention to that content stream. When that content stream is just making us focus on what we see as everything going perfect and well in everybody else's life, and our life is just not measuring up, we need to cut that tap off. We need to pay attention to what we're taking in if it's causing us to pursue perfection rather than pursuing progress. Because we can all learn from our mistakes, and that's where progress lies. You can learn from when you came up short in some way. You can learn from when you've made a mistake and a mess in a relationship in your life. You can learn from that time that you got fired, or that you dropped the ball, or that you missed the opportunity. And that's where progress lives. And that's what it means to learn from our mistakes. You are going to make mistakes. The question is, will you learn from them to make progress? And this is uncommon common sense. Now, if there's any area where people make the same mistakes over and over again, return to their vomit, so to speak, that has a disproportionate impact upon your life, it's in the areas of your dating and sexual integrity, okay? And so you, like Halsey, might feel just that you're bad at love. But uncommon common sense point number 2, if there's one mistake you should avoid, it's misunderstanding the power of your decisions around dating and sex. Now, we're going to be talking about this in a somewhat adult manner. So if you got kids with you, you might want to pause, get something going for the kids, come back to this. Or if you're joining us live here in the room, make sure to just head down the hall, check them into our RVCC kids. But we're going to continue talking about the decisions that we make around dating and sex and how there's a whole lot of uncommon common sense that we need to know. Now, for the parents in the room, you might not know it, but you have prayed this very ancient Hebrew prayer. I almost can guarantee you at some point in your life, if you have kids, Lord, please, please, please do not let my child marry a loser. Okay, I don't care what faith tradition, what background you're coming from, you've prayed some version of that prayer in your life if you've got kids. Because we know out of all the relationships that will define our lives, the person you choose to marry will impact your life more than anyone else. Now, that is if you do choose to marry. Singleness is completely okay and acceptable, and we need to learn to normalize it a little bit more. But the majority of people are still going to pursue romantic relationships. The majority of people are still going to pursue marriage. And so we need to keep this uncommon common sense in mind, mainly if you're pursuing romantic and dating relationships just for the purpose of sex or just fixated on the physical attraction and hotness, you are going to end up getting burned. What does Proverbs have to say about this? We read, "My son, keep your father's command, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them always on your heart. Fasten them around your neck. When you walk, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will speak to you. For this command is a lamp. This teaching is a light. And correction and instruction are the way to life, keeping you from your neighbor's wife, from the smooth talk of a wayward woman. Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. For a prostitute can be had for a loaf of bread, but another man's wife preys on your very life. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned?" Now, whether you're a man or woman joining us, no matter what's going on in your life, probably likely your struggle right now is not actually engaging in sexual relations with a prostitute. But in a sense, we prostitute ourselves when we choose to engage with sexually explicit material online. Why? Because when we do that, we're damaging the capacity for intimacy in the marriage relationship. That trust and that security is eroded when we pursue those things. And so maybe it sounds a bit like old school wisdom here, but pursuing sex or sexual intimacy outside of marriage is like scooping fire and dumping it in your lap. Now here's the thing. Of course, it feels good when people chase sexual relationships outside of the boundaries of marriage. Otherwise, people wouldn't do it. We need to just recognize that's a thing. But reducing sexual activity or dating to merely being about physical pleasure and chasing after that is going to, again, rob us of the intended security and intimacy that is designated and designed for the marriage relationship that we still believe as people of faith is worth celebrating a bride and groom coming together on their wedding day. Let me give you an example. Okay? My family, every year, we try and camp somewhere, like old school, like a tent and campfire ring and all that. Now, almost every single campground, there are different sets of rules around the boundaries in which you can enjoy a campfire. In fact, sometimes there are times in which you cannot light a fire at all. There's a high fire risk, right? They'll say no campfires at all. But most of the time, if you're lucky, there will be a designated area, a campfire ring, in which you are allowed to enjoy a campfire. One of the best things, right? Sitting around at the end of a day, roasting marshmallows, having s'mores, or just sitting around, enjoying peace and quiet. It's one of the best things. But you can't just determine, I want to move my fire ring over there under that tree, right? Because why? You might inadvertently cause a forest fire. And what's meant to be good, enjoying a campfire at your campsite, can quickly turn into a raging forest fire, which is good for no one and brings destruction and pain, okay? And so this is kind of a parallel to our culture's engagement with sexual activity and dating, wanting to dismiss the biblical boundaries for it and say, I can do my own thing. I've got some different values that I'm living by, but we're seeing the destruction, the lack of satisfaction, the lack of intimacy, the lack of safety, because we've all decided to do our own thing. Now, look, I get it. We live in a world where most people are not waiting till marriage to have sex anymore, especially as people wait until their late 20s and into their 30s to get married. But just because the culture is doing something different, and just because this wisdom from Proverbs here, this uncommon common sense, sounds old-timey, sounds like it comes from a different generation, or even if it's unpopular, it doesn't make it any less true. It doesn't make it any less true. And so are you robbing yourself of the intimacy, either presently or in a future relationship with a spouse in marriage, by trading the boundaries of biblical sex for the seasons of physical pleasure outside of marriage? Last bit of uncommon common sense for today, number one on the list for today out of Proverbs is this: recognizing God is present in your life is the first step to living wisely. Now, if you've been paying attention, you're like, that sounds an awful lot like step number 10 or number 10 on the list. It's because it is, right? It's Father's Day. Dads always be lecturing, right? At least that's what my family tells me, that we say the same things over and over again. But I'm intentionally saying the same thing again because this is the key that unlocks all the other common sense of Proverbs. Because you can have all the power, success, everything externally can be going your way, and internally you can be hopeless, empty, and devoid of meaning. And we don't want that for you, and God doesn't want that for you. And so where can you begin today with this uncommon common sense and actually living it out? What I would encourage you to do is go back, look over all of these Proverbs that we talked about, and then just select the one little two-liner, that one little short bit of wisdom, and begin memorizing it. The one that you know you need to hold on to. And then begin, as you memorize it, seeing how it's challenging you to think differently, act differently, or speak differently in your life. So pick one, memorize it, and then see how it begins challenging your daily life and the way you live. Because what if you could live out this uncommon common sense that would enable you to have better relationships with your family? What if you could learn to live out this uncommon common sense that would allow you to be a better listener? If you could be more confident in the decisions that you make? This wisdom is available to any and all of us to live out of. And we believe ultimately it points to the way God has shown up and worked in the person and the work of Jesus. That he is the ultimate embodiment of God's wisdom. And so if you want to meet with any leader here, if you want to get connected and just explore what does it mean to follow Jesus and how does that lead me to live a more wise life, a better life that God intends for me, we would love to connect with you. Indicate that on your connection card. Reach out and message us. We would love to help you explore how this uncommon common sense can transform your life. Thanks for joining us today at Rainier View, and we hope to join you that you'll come back next week as we continue our series Beyond Bored and Confused.